The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 12. Raising the Dead Permanently and Temporarily. Case 22. The dead can be raised. There are two kinds of raising, however. One, a complete restoration to life in the physical body. The other, a temporary materialization of a physical body for a departed spirit to use. In both of these cases, we find proofs of the correctness of the ancient beliefs of the Kahunas. We have accounts of men being permanently raised from the dead in Christian and other religious literature. The Kahunas were able, under certain conditions, to demonstrate such feats and also to explain them in a comprehensible fashion. The temporary raising of a living body for the use of a spirit of the dead was common in Polynesia, and as materialization has been studied and repeatedly verified in psychical research. Case 22. A kahuna raises the dead before Dr. Brigham. It takes but a short time in a warm climate like that of Hawaii for a dead body to begin to decay. However, there is a condition of deep trance or coma which so closely resembles death that there is a grave danger of being mistaken for dead if such a condition, or of being buried alive. The Kahunas believed that decay could not set in until the shadowy body of the low self was entirely withdrawn from the body. The two spirits of the lower man can be out of the physical body in their shadowy bodies and can travel to a great distance, as is done in astral travel, but there is always a connecting thread, the silver cord of theosophy, of shadowy material joining the physical body and the low shadowy body. It is only when this thread is broken that decay sets in. After the connecting thread is broken, it would take an act of the high self to restore tissues which had begun to decay and make possible the return of life to one who has died. On the other hand, if the thread is unbroken, as is often the case when death comes without an injury to the tissues, as in drowning, life may be restored if a return to the body is made possible for the spirits. The shadowy body of the low self, as has been already explained, is an ideal storage place for vital force, and when the spirits leave the body, most of the vital force is taken along in the shadowy body. When the dense physical body is left behind, after the removal of the elements of consciousness and vital force from it, unconsciousness and inaction result. Studies made of patients suffering from epilepsy show that after the characteristic cry, in quotes, CRY, and fall, there is no action of either the body waves or the brain waves as measured by recording instruments. The indication is that the two selves of the patient in their shadowy bodies have been driven out of the body temporarily, or, as an alternate possibility, the two selves have remained in the body but have been robbed of the last vestige of vital force by a spirit of the obsessing type. Consciousness returns to the patient in about the length of time required to rebuild the supply of vital force. The case. Dr. Brigham, during one of his field trips in search of rare indigenous plants in Hawaii, took refuge in a coastal village during a very severe storm. In the storm, a native lad of about 16 was drowned. All efforts to revive him failed, and a kahuna living some distance away was summoned. The kahuna, an old man, arrived and began work about 8 hours after the accident. The boy's body was cold, and when examined by Dr. Brigham shortly before the arrival of the kahuna, seemed to have begun to stiffen in rigor mortis. The kahuna sat down near the body and set to work to use his psychic powers to learn what had become of the lad's two spirits. In this work, as he later explained, he had the help of several spirit friends. Open bracket. The shadowy body cord must still have connected the body to the low self of the lad, although probably stretched to the breaking point. Close bracket. The boy's selves were found wandering in a confused state and brought back to the body, being urged to remain there and make every possible effort to re-enter it. The body was warmed, and while the kahuna applied his hands to it, he gave of his own vital force. He also used verbal suggestion to cause the return into the body, using as a physical stimulus a stroking and squeezing as if the spirits were re-entering by way of one of the big toes and was being squeezed up the leg into the body. The kahuna also invoked the god in quotes, in brackets, high self, asking for aid. After about an hour, he announced that the spirits of the boy were entering the body. Gradually, the flesh became warmer. The heart began to beat, and the boy opened his eyes. The recovery was so rapid that in a short time he was asking for food. Dr. Brigham, greatly impressed by the demonstration of the kahuna magic, asked many questions of the kahuna, learning little beyond the fact that the god whose aid had been given was one of the amakuas, or parental and greatly trustworthy spirits, who have formerly been men living in bodies on earth. He kept track of the Hawaiian lad for a number of years, and there seemed never to have been appreciable after effects from the death by drowning. The aid of the spirits, who have once been men and women in flesh, is no new thing. The annals of spiritualism and psychical research are filled with accounts of successful healing of the living through the ministrations of the spirit dead. The most successful of these spirit healers often speak of their work being done by prayers to higher spirits, or the conventional concept of God. The spirits, like the living, have no way to make direct contact with the level of consciousness one step above, and can only speculate about the high beings and their form of mentation, which enables them to use a mysterious power for magical healing. Many spirits have given their ideas of the mechanisms by which healing is accomplished, but even when they claim to have exact knowledge, no two of them agree. They are amusingly like the living, each evolving his own explanation and rejecting all others. In the face of the sharp contradictions found in the explanations given by the spirits of the dead, we do well to fall back on the ancient explanations given by the kahunas, for they are correct in all details so far as we are able to check them with our present limited knowledge. And what is more important, they work as a basis for practical application. The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Case 23. Raising the Dead Temporarily. Full Materialization. Nothing in the psychical research has been so fascinating, so incredible, so violently denied, if futilely, so inexplicable, or so deeply significant as full materialization, or the temporary raising of the dead. In raising the dead, as the process applies to the spirits of those long since passed over, there is the same need for the various elements which constitute a normal living man. The low and middle spirits of the deceased individual come to a spiritualistic seance. They furnish the element of consciousness. They live in the combined low and middle shadowy bodies, so bring these with them, and thus furnish a mold of the physical body which they have had on the earth level. What the high self lacks is the former physical body and its naturally large charge of vital force. To supply this lack, the vital force and physical matter are drawn from the circle of living sitters. The physical matter is changed to the thin ectoplasmic form, and then solidified in the mold of the spirit's low shadowy body. This results in a full materialization of an actual, living, breathing, warm, and completely normal physical body with the two spirits resident inside it. Such bodies have repeatedly stood close medical examination. However, they are not permanent. In from a moment to seldom more than an hour, the ectoplasmic material is returned to the living and the solid form vanishes. It is conceivable that such a materialized body might be permanent if borrowed physical substance did not have to be returned. The second coming of Jesus might thus be accomplished were some devotee willing to step out of the flesh into the life of the departed and give his body to be used in this way to fill the mold of the shadowy body of the great teacher. In one of the Pacific Islands a few years ago, there was quite a furor caused by a group of Polynesian natives who held secret seances at night and succeeded in getting a dead chief raised by the process of materialization. This chief, who had died a leper, was very wise and much loved. Oddly enough, he materialized and remained in the body for much longer periods than is common in the West. Because the authorities feared that the natives would be stirred to rebellion by the chief, the excuse was made that the materialization might spread leprosy, and the seances were broken up. Here are the cases. A. The Kahunas and mass materialization in Hawaii. In Hawaii, where the Kahunas were the most powerful workers in psychic phenomena, mass materializations have been reported down through the years. Usually a native chief, from 10 to 50 of his followers, all long dead, materialize at night and march through the countryside. Often they materialize drums and torches. Sometimes they remain invisible, but the sound of marching feet and the drums and voices may be clearly heard. These ghostly processions are well known in Hawaii and have often been well substantiated and many times described in books and articles about the islands. Dr. John Tanner, who studied the Kahunas in Hawaii for some time, told me that he was at Waikiki Beach one night when he heard the ghostly marchers in procession moving toward the center of Honolulu. He guessed that they might be following the route described as usual by the older Hawaiians, that from Waikiki to the royal tombs near the old missionary church at the center of the city. Taking his car, he drove to the old church and waited. In a surprisingly short time, the same sounds of marching feet became audible, also soft chanting and low conversation. The sounds seemed to be swallowed up by the tomb of a native king long dead in the churchyard. Dr. Tanner saw nothing. Dr. Brigham had many first-hand accounts of seeing visible marchers by torchlight and moonlight. The Hawaiians agree that fully materialized marchers, armed with war clubs and spears, are dangerous to anyone who interferes with them. If such a procession is seen to approach, the wise native gets out of the way or hides himself and remains very quiet while watching it pass. There are several accounts of men having been killed by the marchers. One Hawaiian of my acquaintance claimed to have run face to face into a small group of such marchers, all armed and garbed in feather cloaks. One warrior rushed at him with a spear, but he instantly called out that he was a living relative and a friend. He was given time to tell his name and to recite the names of the ancestors. It was almost inevitable that, traced back a few generations, he would come to a family relation with any former citizen of these parts, and he did. He was pardoned for his accidental intrusion into the line of march and sent on his way. While it is evident that much fiction has been added to the commonly accepted facts concerning the ghostly processions in Hawaii, I have no doubt that the basic facts are true. Legendary lore of the Polynesians is filled with accounts of mass and single materializations. The gods help the spirits of the dead to materialize, and it is related that vital force and substance for ectoplasm are borrowed from the living while they sleep, or on rare occasions are taken from animal and plant life. The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 12, Part B. A bishop materializes after 400 years of death. Carlo Mirabelli, a South American medium of Indian blood, provided excellent examples of nearly all types of psychic phenomena. Dr. Fodor writes, Mirabelli's phenomena of materialization were astounding. The figures were not only complete, they were not only photographed, but medical men made minute examinations, which lasted sometimes as long as for 15 minutes, and stated that the newly constituted human beings had perfect anatomical structure. After the examination was completed, the figure began to dissolve from the feet upwards, the bust and arms floating in the air. One of the doctors exclaimed, "But this is too much," and rushed forward and seized the half of the body. The next moment he uttered a shrill cry and sank unconscious to the ground. On returning to consciousness, he only remembered that when he had seized the phantom, it had felt as if his fingers were pressing a spongy, flaccid mass of substance. Then he received a shock and lost consciousness. For 36 minutes in broad daylight, the materialization of the little daughter of Dr. Souza, who died of influenza, was visible to all the sitters. She appeared in her grave clothes. Her pulse was tested. Father and child were photographed. Then the phantom raised itself and floated in the air. In another sitting, Mirabelli announced that he saw the bottom of Bishop Dr. Jose Camargo Barros, who lost his life in a shipwreck. A sweet smell, as of roses, filled the room. The medium went into trance. A fine mist was seen in the circle of sitters. The mist, glowing as if of gold, parted, and the bishop materialized, and all the robes and insignia of office. He called his own name. Dr. Souza stepped to him. He palpitated the body, touched his teeth, tested the saliva, listened to the heartbeat, investigated the working of the intestines, nails and eyes, without finding anything amiss. Then the other attending persons convinced themselves of the reality of the apparition. The bishop bent smilingly over Mirabelli and looked at him silently. Then he slowly dematerialized. At the sixth setting, Mirabelli, tied and sealed, disappeared from the room and was found in another room, still in trance. All seals on doors and windows were found in order, as well as the seals on Mirabelli himself. Once, among 14 investigators, his arms dematerialized. On the photograph, only a slight shadow is visible. Part C. Yolanda and her materializations. Madame Elizabeth d'Espérance, a famous medium, had, among other spirits who materialized at her seances, an Arab girl of 15 named Yolanda. This girl would appear in a mist and take several minutes to become fully materialized. Then, in good light, she was accustomed to talk with the living and to make objects in the room appear and disappear. She produced apports in great numbers and caused plants to grow in water bottles filled with water and sand, a large plant being grown in a few minutes. The medium was found by the investigator Alexander N. Aksakoff, A-K-S-A-K-O-F, on one occasion to have dematerialized the lower half of her body, while visible spiritual materializations were in the seance room. The upper half of the medium seemed to be suspended in air. She was not in trance and was frightened to discover her condition, calling the investigators' attention to the situation. Others present also assured themselves that there was nothing in the collapsed garments of the medium below the waist. 10 years later, Aksakoff published a weighty opinion, which years of study and observation had forced upon him. The opinion that, in some cases at least, quote, the body of the medium is entirely absorbed for the production of apparitions, end quote. The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Animal materializations. The Kahuna contention that all things have shadowy bodies, which are molds of their microscopic parts as well as of their full form and shape, applies to animals as well as men. Also insects and inert objects such as rocks. Gambier Bolton, Gambier Bolton, had a peculiar experience. He had befriended and doctored a wounded seal at a zoo, but the seal had died. 10 days after its death, at a seance with Mrs. Craddock and a number of men of science present, a seal, seemingly the one known to Bolton, materialized and flapped its way across the room, staying close to Bolton for several minutes. The spirits officiating at the seance were asked to explain this. They said, their actions are altogether independent of us. Whilst we are busily engaged in conducting our experiments with human entities who wish to materialize in your midst, the animals get into the room in some way which we do not understand and which we cannot prevent, obtain from somewhere sufficient matter with which to build up temporary bodies, coming just when they choose, roaming about the room just as they please, and disappearing when it suits them, and not before. And we have no power to prevent this as long as the affection existing between them and their late owners is so strong as it is in instances which have come under our notice. Dr. Fodor points out that the above statement from the medium's spirit controls seems contradicted by the fact that in the famous animal materializations at Kluski seances, Kluski seances, there invariably appeared a human apparition acting as keeper of such animals as appeared. The keepers and animals seldom moved about at the same time, but the keepers, although still, were to be plainly seen. However, there was one animal which appeared with no keeper. It was an ape man, spoken of by the investigators as Pithecanthropus. It had coarse, shaggy hair, smelled like a cross between a deer and a wet dog, and was frolicsome, evidently of a low level of intelligence, but gentle and ready to obey. Its great strength caused fear at a few of the sittings at which it appeared. It lifted heavy men seated in their chairs high above the heads of the others. It picked up a large and very heavy case of books and carried it about the room, also a large sofa. It made only smacking sounds and scratched itself frequently. Dogs, cats, parrots, bats, weasels, and many other dead pets have returned to visit their former owners at seances. Hairs from one small pet animal were left behind in some lace on which its leg had been entangled during the appearance. The lace had been torn 4 inches. These hairs were placed in a light, tight, and damp-proof box and were inspected often. After a few days, the hairs dwindled in size and before long vanished entirely, evidently dematerializing much more slowly than had the little animal itself. The Secret Science Behind Miracles by Max Freedom Long. Materialization of the little people. Fairies and other little people seem to materialize in visible and even tangible forms at times, most often in the presence of children. Around the year 1915, 2 young girls in England used their father's camera to get pictures of fairies and gnomes. The pictures were published, and quite a stir created. A better camera was provided and more pictures obtained. The charge of the suspicious that the negatives could have been faked was never proved. In Hawaii, there is a belief in the gnomes, or the Menehunes, Menehunes, these materializing at times and resembling the brownies of other lands. During my stay in Honolulu, the papers were filled with accounts and comments after school children discovered one of the little men on the playground and followed him excitedly until he took fright and escaped from them by diving under a building set a few feet off the ground. He seemed to disappear into thin air under the building. The teacher, hearing the shouts, came on the scene and questioned the children. They all told the same story and described the little man in the same way. The Menehunes were credited with the building of many stone walls to enclose armies of shallow sea and act as artificial fish ponds. In native folklore, a variety of such little people receive mention. While the evidence of the materialization of elves, fairies, gnomes, and their like is poorly verified, it would seem to be a mistake not to mention the possibility of their reality in listing the materials of this study at this point. Several things need to be especially noted in the above cases. The shock which rendered the doctor unconscious when he seized an apparition of one of Mirabelli's seances indicated the electrical factor involved in materialization. Many investigators have studied the evidence of electrical, vital, or psychic force at work during materialization and have found it very real, even if its function was not fully understood. Spirits of the dead give contradictory opinions as to the nature and the use of the force, some saying it is drawn from the brain of the medium or sitters, others saying it comes from their bodies, and still others saying it is present in the atmosphere and has only to be collected. Modern studies by medical men have proved that the electrovital body electricity, or mind electricity, or both, are exhausted in a living person. Unconsciousness results. Let me read that sentence again. Modern studies by medical men have proved that when the electrovital body electricity or mind electricity or both are exhausted in a living person, unconsciousness results. This agrees with the kahuna belief that all consciousness functions only when there is at hand a proper amount of vital force, of the necessary voltage. Remember that they believe that the low self makes the vital force from foods we eat, and that the middle self takes this low voltage force and steps up its voltage for the use in will, W-I-L-L, and that the high self takes the force and steps up the voltage to the highest voltage, in which condition it becomes similar to the atom smashing voltages known to science. The vitality of mediums and sitters at seances has often been depleted by materializations. The famous medium D.D. Home, H-O-M-E, was sometimes left lying almost unconscious on the floor after a seance. One investigator, F.W.H. Myers, was so depleted after a seance that he went to bed for 2 days. Mediums frequently have been forced to take long rest periods between sittings. The Kahunas, in their healing practices, watch for the danger of the theft of the vital force from the living by the dead. While doctors do not recognize such possibilities at the present time, it is evident in the light of the long study of the kahuna lore that some illness is directly caused by such theft of vital force. The doctors do, however, know that when vital force falls below par in the medium, the control of the conscious mind over the subconscious is greatly weakened, causing thought impressions to enter the subconscious without being subjected to the usual process of judgment by reason, causing unreasonable complexes or fixations. We have seen that shock impressions are dangerous when one is very tired or vitality is low because of illness or strain. That if, for some reason, the normal supply of vital force continues for some time to fall, depression states come, and at more advanced stages, insanity results. While medical men make no mention of the rest of the usual story, the patient, once insanity becomes pronounced, seems no longer to suffer so greatly from lack of vital force. Often there is a violent physical action indicating that the Kahunas were right in thinking that the spirits of the dead often obsess the living, beginning by stealing the vital force and ending by pushing out the resident pair of spirits and taking over the body for themselves, thus accomplishing a form of rising from the dead for themselves. And then it says in brackets here, doctors frown on the idea, but when they administer insulin shock or electrical shock to cure the insane, they are doing nothing more or less than the physicians of early times when they made the stay of obsessing spirits so painful in the body of the insane patient that the invaders left, allowing the rightful owners of the body to return. End of bracket. The passage of matter through matter in materialization is demonstrated when apports and even bodies of large animals and men are dematerialized and brought through closed and sealed doors to be materialized in the seance room. This indicates the fact that in dematerialized state, physical substance is let me start the sentence again, sorry. This indicates the fact that in the dematerialized state, physical substance is sufficiently thin to pass through wood and other not too dense substances. And then it says in brackets, glass seems too dense to allow such passage of thin materials or shadowy body molds through it. It is not necessary for the spirit of a dead person to materialize in denser form in order to carry vital force with it. Also, dematerialized physical substances need not be solidified to the visible state to be used as an invisible hand in moving solid objects, provided there is enough vital force lodged in the invisible ectoplasmic substance used by the spirit. A case illustrating this came under my observation. A young man was to arrive by plane and have dinner with his sweetheart and her mother. The plane crashed and he was killed at landing. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang at the house that he had intended to visit. The sweetheart answered the bell, but found no one was there. The bell rang 3 times, the mother joining the girl in trying to learn who had caused the ringing. Some months later, at a seance, the young man communicated through a medium, saying that he had not been aware of his death and he had gone to the home where he had been expected. He rang the bell 3 times, being greatly surprised and agitated to find that he was not seen or recognized by his friends. He failed after the 3rd ring to be able to press the button. In brackets, vital force evidently expended, close bracket, and concluded that something was very wrong. All the evidence accumulated by the study of hundreds of cases of haunting and poltergeist phenomena indicates that the Kahunas were right in believing that the spirits of the dead can store large amounts of vital force in the shadowy body of the low self. At the moment of sudden death, the shadowy body is charged with vital force and seems to remain charged and ready to ring bells and do other kinds of work until the charge is exhausted. The poltergeist being usually a low self cut off from the middle self after death and given to childish antics, steals vital force from the living and uses it to move solid objects or to make noises. The shadowy body appears to be an excellent storage battery for vital force, and when heavily charged, may become sufficiently solid to be used to move material objects. A small amount of ectoplasmic material of the invisible and very thin grade may be needed to stiffen the shadowy body. Later study may show whether or not this is true. In cases where animals materialize at seances, one can only conclude that high selves are present and doing the work. If the spirits of the dead disagree so largely on how materialization is accomplished, so showing that they are ignorant of the part played by the high selves, it stands to reason that animals would not have sufficient intelligence to cause a materialization for themselves. One more thing should be kept in mind. The materials of a supposedly living and fleshy nature used in forming ectoplasm with which to materialize animals, birds, insects, cannot be said to come from the medium and the sitters. It must be found in other quarters by the high self and borrowed for temporary use. In fact, materializations have often been observed when no visible material was drawn from either the medium or the sitters through the expenditures of vital force from the circle although the expenditure of vital force from the circle is very usual. As the blacker phases of ceremonial magic, it is probable. Let me start that sentence over again, sorry. In the blacker phases of ceremonial magic, it is probable that the vital force of sacrificed animals or even humans was taken and used by spirits. But it is to be concluded that the high selves would never use vital force or bodily materials of sacrificial victims. The kahuna name for the high self was entirely trustworthy parental self. And there seems to be no question as to its aversion to cruelty. With the end of this chapter, I finish the work. With the end of this chapter, I finish the work of presenting the basic elements in the theories of Huna, together with some of the proofs derived from comparison with the findings of psychic science and psychologists, also, to a lesser extent, various religious beliefs. And that concludes chapter 12. Chapter 13 is entitled The Life-Giving Secrets of Lomi Lomi and Laying On of Hands. Wow, that'll be interesting. Till soon.